Psalm 102. This psalm is titled A Prayer of the Afflicted when he is overwhelmed and poureth out his complaint before the Lord. Verse 1 says, Hear my prayer, O Lord, and let my cry come unto thee. Hide not thy face from me in the day when I am in trouble. Incline thine ear unto me in the day when I call, answer me speedily. For my days are consumed like smoke, and my bones are burned as an hearth. My heart is smitten and withered like grass, so that I forget to eat my bread. By reason of the voice of my groaning, my bones cleave to my skin. I am like a pelican of the wilderness. I am like an owl of the desert. I watch, and am as a sparrow alone upon the housetop. Mine enemies reproach me all the day, and they that are mad against me are sworn against me. For I have eaten ashes like bread, and mingled my drink with weeping. Because of thine indignation and thy wrath, for thou hast lifted me up and cast me down. My days are like a shadow that declineth. I am withered like grass. But thou, O Lord, shalt endure forever, and thy remembrance unto all generations. Thou shalt arise and have mercy upon Zion, for the time to favor her, yea, the set time is come. For thy servants take pleasure in her stones, and favor the dust thereof. So the heathen shall fear the name of the Lord, and all the kings of the earth thy glory. When the Lord shall build up Zion, he shall appear in his glory. He will regard the prayer of the destitute, and not despise their prayer. This shall be written for the generation to come, and the people which shall be created shall praise the Lord. For he hath looked down from the height of his sanctuary, from heaven did the Lord behold the earth, to hear the groaning of the prisoner, to loose those that are appointed to death, to declare the name of the Lord in Zion, and his praise in Jerusalem, when the people are gathered together in the kingdoms to serve the Lord. He weakened my strength in the way, he shortened my days. I said, O my God, take me not away in the midst of my days. Thy years are throughout all generations. Of old hast thou laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of thy hands. They shall perish, but thou shalt endure. Yea, all of them shall wax old like a garment. As a vesture shalt thou change them, and they shall be changed. But thou art the same, and thy years shall have no end. The children of thy servants shall continue, and their seed shall be established before thee. So, again, the title is A Prayer of the Afflicted when he is overwhelmed and poureth out his complaint before the Lord. So it's not merely just a prayer of the afflicted, it's a prayer of the afflicted when he is overwhelmed. When there's just too much whelming to go around. And so he starts out, Hear my prayer, O Lord, and let my cry come unto thee. Hide not thy face from me in the day when I am in trouble. Incline thine ear unto me in the day when I call. Answer me speedily. And so the first thing that's being done here is the psalmist, the prayer, not the person, not the prayer itself, but the person saying the prayer, the prayer. The prayer here, first thing he does is address the Lord and ask to be heard. Then, after asking to be heard, in verse 3, says, For my days are consumed like smoke, and my bones are burned as an hearth. And so, this person is afflicted. There's no question about that. This person is overwhelmed. There's no question about that. Even in that time of overwhelming affliction, he doesn't start the prayer with, everything's fallen to pieces, I don't know what I'm going to do. He starts the prayer by engaging with the Lord. He doesn't start out saying, you got to do this for me and you got to do that for me. How many times do we in our personal lives start a conversation with somebody and we don't even engage with them? We just vomit our problems out to them before they even have a chance to get their bearings. Not that the Lord needs a chance to get his bearings. Not that he's one of us finite-minded people that needs that. But the Lord is, in a broad sense, broad use of the word, a person. A person. Now, he's a higher person, an eternal person, but we talk about having respect for people and having respect for other persons. The Lord is the highest among all persons, and I wouldn't even say highest among, I'd say highest above all persons. Shouldn't we also respect him? At least have the courtesy to engage him even in our weakest, deepest, darkest moment, prior to just spilling out everything. Not that he can't handle it, but because it's what he's owed. It glorifies him. So now in verse 3 it says, "For my days are consumed like smoke, and my bones are burned as an hearth. My heart is smitten and withered like grass, so that I forget to eat my bread." Now, before we go on through the rest of this, we're going to turn to Job chapter 30. Job chapter 30. I'm going to read a couple verses here. Job chapter 30. Verses 29 and 30. Verses 29 and 30 of Job chapter 30 say, "I am a brother to dragons and a companion to owls. My skin is black upon me, and my bones are burned with heat." And then back in verse 19 of this chapter, it says, "He hath cast me into the mire, and I am become like dust and ashes." And so, looking at these verses, it says back in Psalm 102, starting again in verse 3, "For my days are consumed like smoke, and my bones are burned as an hearth. My heart is smitten and withered like grass, so that I forget to eat my bread. By reason of the voice of my groaning, my bones cleave to my skin. I am like a pelican of the wilderness. I am like an owl of the desert." And so the connection here is that there's, and why we're bringing up the owl, and I believe why Job brought up that he was a brother to dragons and a companion to owls, his skin black upon him, bones burned with heat, is that they understood the owl to be a desert bird. Now, we don't live in a desert, but we still have our types of owls, but over there, they have an owl that's a desert bird. And what do we know about the desert? It's dry, it's hot, and it's not plentiful. Nutrition is scarce in the desert. Comfort is not to be found. It's full of pain, heat, emptiness. It's funny for something to be full of emptiness. But here, there are a lot of connections between the psalmist and Job. And it's meant to just evoke a sense of affliction. This person here is afflicted. Afflicted by the heat, afflicted by the elements, afflicted by the limitations of the human body, afflicted by hunger, just all around afflicted. And he says in verse 7, "I watch him, and as a sparrow alone upon the housetop, Mine enemies reproach me all the day, and they that are mad against me are sworn against me. So I'm in this situation. Verse 5 says, by reason of the voice of my groaning, my bones cleave to my skin. You've seen probably, I have, I don't know if you have, the pictures of the old Civil War veterans that were in the prison at Andersonville, where they were so emaciated because they hadn't been fed that they just looked like skeletons with skin hanging on them. That's not quite the level that we're getting to here, but he does say, my bones cleave to my skin. You've probably seen a malnourished person or somebody who's just not eating enough and they're very small framed and they have, you can see the rib cage poking out. Not necessarily that they're so emaciated they're just a skeleton, but you've seen that, you know what we're talking about, that the bones are visible, the outline is visible. That's what's being described here. So it's not that far extreme. I guess this is your right side, so it's not that far extreme. It's somewhere closer to a middle ground, but it's still bad. It's not a good situation. In the midst of all that, he says in verse 8, mine enemies reproach me all the day, and they that are mad against me are sworn against me. So not only is life in general overwhelming, but other people are becoming overwhelming for this person. Now, I'm brought back in my mind, and I don't think that this is where this psalm is going, but I'll just tell you what I think of when I read this. I think of Jesus in the wilderness, fasting 40 days and 40 nights. And at the end of all that, that is when Satan comes. In the weakest moment of Jesus' life, before he's on the cross, this is the weakest moment, I would say, in his adult life. And that's when Satan comes to tempt him. He's being reproached by his enemy. And Satan is pressing him. And you notice that's when enemies tend to attack. Enemies pay attention. At least smart ones do. They pay attention and they go for you when you're weak, when you're vulnerable, when you're afflicted. So it shouldn't be surprising that during this time of affliction, that's when his enemies come together and reproach him. We see the same thing when Jesus is on the cross. Again, I believe Satan attempting to act as the accuser, attempting to act as the antagonist, attempting to do battle with Jesus in what is literally his most physical, weakest point. Satan also attempts to do spiritual battle with Jesus during that time. And again, there is no weaker point because we know what Jesus says on the cross. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? The Father turns away when Jesus takes upon the sin of the whole world, past, present, and future. Becomes sin for us. And Satan attacks him then. And Satan still loses. Satan is still defeated. Jesus is still victorious. So, I come to that not to put the psalmist down, not to shame the psalmist for being afflicted and overwhelmed, because we all get afflicted and overwhelmed. We're all flawed human beings. Jesus was not a flawed human being. He was a sinless human being. He was 100% man, 100% God. So while he was subject we're not going to get into that this morning, because then you get into the idea of whether it was even possible for Jesus to have sinned. I'm not going to get into that this morning, because that could turn into a 3-hour thing, and we're just going to stay off that topic. But regardless, we know that every one of us in Jesus' position would have failed. Not one of us could have done what he did. Not one of us would have forgiven our assailants in the midst of that event. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they do. They don't even have the slightest clue of what they're doing. So forgive them. We wouldn't have that attitude. You might think you would like to have that attitude. You don't. You won't. It won't happen. It just won't. Even if those are the words that come out of your mouth, it's not the words out of your heart. Not that I know your heart, but I know mine, and I believe that we're all of like passion in one way or another. So, not that I'm able to read you, but I think that myself is a good enough case study to be able to guess how everybody else would react. So, verse 9 now. For I have eaten ashes like bread and mingled my drink with weeping. And so, finishing up the thought and moving into this one, Jesus could have withstood all this, and he did withstand. The psalmist is having difficulty here, and it's not to put down the psalmist, but it should give us an idea of what our goal ought to be. If we are going to call ourselves Christians, those first 6 letters being Christ, I am a Christian. I am the word means little Christ. I am Christ-like. I am identifying myself with him. I ought to try to behave like him. And so that should be our goal, even though we're going to fail and slip and stumble. Whenever we're afflicted and overwhelmed, our immediate turn should be to the Father, just like this prayer is doing, the psalmist here. But we should remember that it is that Jesus made it through. And even if we can't make it through, even if we know that we're not going to cross the finish line, that's no excuse not to get as close to it as we can. So, verse 9, for I have eaten ashes like bread and mingled my drink with weeping. And again, that goes back to one of the verses we read in Job. It was Job 30:19. It says, he hath cast me into the mire, and I am become like dust and ashes. I may have told this story before. I can't remember how old I was. I was maybe 4 years old, maybe 5 years old. I was riding in the back of the vehicle, which is where a 4 or 5 year old would normally ride. They normally wouldn't ride in the front. And there was I want to say it was a can of Mountain Dew in the back seat cup holder, right behind the console. I can't remember what vehicle it was. I just remember I was in it and we were driving, and I was on Coal Branch. And I was thinking to myself, I'm kind of thirsty. I'd like to have a little bit of that Mountain Dew. It wasn't mine. It was, I think, my mom's. Grabbed that thing, did this, and came that close to vomiting immediately. Because what was in that can was not Mountain Dew.
Tobacco juice?
No, it wasn't tobacco juice. It was cigarette ashes. And I got me a little mouthful of cigarette ashes with a slight Mountain Dew accent. And it was, to this day, probably the top 3 grossest things I've ever had in my mouth. And it was very bad. It was a rough situation for everybody in the car at that time. But, I couldn't imagine, it says, "For I have eaten ashes like bread." Couldn't imagine the disgust. To get to the point where you would voluntarily put ashes in your mouth. And I don't know necessarily that the psalmist is voluntarily eating the ashes. It might just be the nature of when you're surrounded by them. It's just like when you're on the ocean. You can't help but get sand in places you don't want it to get into. Whenever you're around sand, it's going to get somewhere you don't want it to be. Whether that's if you're walking and you don't want it in your shoes, it's going to get in your shoes. If you sit down and you don't want it to get in your hair, it's going to find a way to get in your hair. It's going to get up under your fingernails. It's going to get somewhere you don't want it to be. And so the same thing with ashes. It's going to find its way into where you don't want it to be. It says, "For I have eaten ashes like bread and mingled my drink with weeping." Now, when I ate those ashes 20-some years ago, I wish I would have had enough tears to be able to stream down and rinse my mouth out, but that wasn't the case. But that's what this person is saying. The psalmist here is saying, my drink is mingled with weeping. The tears are so heavy that they're mixing into the drink. Verse 10, "Because of thine indignation and thy wrath, for thou hast lifted me up and cast me down. My days are like a shadow that declineth, and I am withered like grass." And the psalmist here recognizes that God has allowed this to happen. "Because of thine indignation and thy wrath, for thou hast lifted me up and cast me down. My days are like a shadow that declineth, and I am withered like grass." And that's a hard truth for some people to grapple with. That that in the midst of some of the deepest and darkest moments, God is still in control. And the idea of what that means is that God was in control when things weren't so bad. He didn't relinquish control, and then they got bad. That has to mean that God allowed it to happen or caused it to happen. One or the other. Either he caused it or he allowed it. And for him to cause something or to allow something, he's got a reason for either one. So the psalmist here just says, I'm going through this, it's because of thine indignation and my wrath, for thou hast lifted me up and cast me down. Even if God didn't actually cast this person down, to this person, God causing it or God allowing it, either way he had a reason. Either way, same result. So, verse 11, "My days are like a shadow that declineth, and I am withered like grass." We get a pretty good picture of that over the past month or so, with all of the heat and not a lot of rain. Seems like everybody's yard, everybody's fields, it all started turning brown a little bit earlier than it normally does. Unless I'm just very unobservant over the past few years. It seemed like everything started turning brown a little bit quicker. Grass stopped growing a little bit quicker this year. So we've got a pretty good picture this year in our own community of what that means to be withered like grass. "But thou, O Lord, shalt endure forever, and thy remembrance unto all generations." And so the recognition here is that regardless of what I'm going through, regardless of my affliction, regardless of my being overwhelmed, the Lord shall endure forever, and his remembrance unto all generations. Verse 13 says, Thou shalt arise and have mercy upon Zion, for the time to favor her, yea, the set time is come. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. There is a reckoning that will put things in order. Thou shalt arise and have mercy upon Zion, for the time to favor her, yea, for the set time is come. Now, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on the doctrinal application of this morning, because we've spent a collective number of years on this exact same doctrinal application. This clearly, Zion, mercy upon Zion after affliction. Not going to spend a great deal of time on it. Clearly, this is a type, a reference to the tribulation period, the affliction of the Jews in the tribulation period, and the restoration that we get glimpses of. It's so clear, I'm not even going to talk about it anymore in this chapter, in this psalm. We're going to focus on the spiritual application a little bit. So when the Lord shall build up saw Zion and skip down the page. Thou shalt arise and have mercy upon Zion, for the time to favor her, yea, the set time is come. There will be a time. Now for us in the church age, for us as Christians, I believe that time is variable. Sometimes it could be during our lifetime here, and I think it's different for each individual. If we're talking about individuals, if we're not talking about the church as a whole, if we're talking about each individual Christian, this time for God to favor us, He always favors us. But in the context of what's being said here, sometimes we go through rough patches. Sometimes we go through trials and tribulations. Sometimes things happen that are difficult in our lives, and we become afflicted and we become overwhelmed. Sometimes the mercy comes in our lifetime. Sometimes the mercy comes at our death. For some, the mercy will come at the rapture, whether that be us, or whether that be the next generation or the generation after, or however many generations it takes. But there will be a time. There will be a time where the affliction ends, where God reverses it. And that may mean that we spend 80 to 90 to somewhere under 120 years on this earth being afflicted. Some people live lives of affliction. They've got some kind of disease that will never go away. They've got some kind of pain that will never go away. And we recognize, in the midst of all that, and you have to recognize, God is in control. That He's allowing those things to happen, or causing those things to happen. Either way, same result. So, you think, it's difficult now, but it will come to an end. It will come to an end. And so verses 14 and 15 here are very clearly doctrinal application verses. It says, For thy servants take pleasure in her stones, and favor the dust thereof, so the heathen shall fear the name of the Lord, and all the kings of the earth thy glory. It's clearly referring to Zion, Jerusalem, and the connection with the stones, with the dust, with the land itself. Verse 16 says, When the Lord shall build up Zion, he shall appear in his glory. He will regard the prayer of the destitute and not despise their prayer. Okay, so verse 17. He will regard the prayer of the destitute and not despise their prayer. He will hear it. He will hear it and he will act upon it. Verse 18, This shall be written for the generation to come, and the people which shall be created shall praise the Lord. Again, not spending time on it because it just jumps off the page. But this is clearly, the doctrinal application is to the future generation that are going to undergo the tribulation period, and then hope for them that the people which shall be created shall praise the Lord, that future generations will praise the Lord. It says in verse 19, "For he hath looked down from the height of his sanctuary. From heaven did the Lord behold the earth." And so from heaven, the Lord looks down, and he beholds me. From heaven, the Lord looks down, and he beholds you. He beholds the people down the street, the people across the river, the people across the ocean. He beholds the earth. He observes it all. And so, verse 20 says, "To hear the groaning of the prisoner, to loose those that are appointed to death, to declare the name of the Lord in Zion and his praise in Jerusalem, when the people are gathered together and the kingdoms to serve the Lord." So again, just evident that this is regarding his second coming. How does that affect us today? What can we learn about this to be better for the Lord today, in the moment? That, again, even though things are difficult at times, even though we undergo affliction, even though we get overwhelmed, he is still God, he still endures, he still has control, and he will work it out. Verse 23 says, "He weakened my strength in the way. He shortened my days." When is God's power and glory most evident? When is his strength on display? In our weakness. In our weakness. "I said, O my God, take me not away in the midst of my days. Thy years are throughout all generations." So the psalmist doesn't want to be taken out in the middle. Thy years are throughout all generations. He wants to see God's glory. He wants to participate in that. "Of old thou hast laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of thy hands. They shall perish, but thou shalt endure. Yea, all of them shall wax old like a garment. As a vesture shalt thou change them, and they shall be changed." We talked about this a little bit a while back. I'm going to turn to Hebrews chapter 1. Hebrews chapter 1, verses 10 through 12 says, "And thou, Lord, in the beginning hast laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the works of thine hands. They shall perish, but thou remainest, and they shall all wax old as doth a garment, and as a vesture shalt thou fold them up, and they shall be changed. But thou art the same, and thy years shall not fail." And so we have the same language here. We have the Hebrew writer calling back to Psalm 102. And we've talked a little bit about how God, and in specifically deeply rooted in the Jewish tradition, and it's because of Psalm 102, and I believe it's carried over into the New Testament here in Hebrews. The idea that God clothes himself, that he hides himself, that he doesn't make himself fully realized, fully accessible, fully visible to us. And he does that with creation itself, with the universe. And we see the closest any man ever gets to seeing the face of God, if you're not counting, I'm meaning God the Father, Moses. Moses gets to see God. But what does he get to see? He doesn't get to see his face. God says, he's going to turn around, Moses. I'll let you look at my back. And he looks upon the back of God because he cannot fully, we are unable to grasp the full greatness and glory of God. We aren't even equipped to be able to receive it. It's something that God hides behind creation, and we see glimpses of it. We see little bits and pieces, but we don't see the whole thing. One day, we will. One day, it says, as a vesture thou shalt fold them up, and they shall be changed. God is going to be the same as he was before creation, the same as he's the same today, and he'll be the same whenever he remakes creation with the new heaven and the new earth. He'll stay the same. We will be changed. We will be changed. These garments, the vesture, that will be changed. He'll stay the same. And so, verse 27 back in Psalm 102 says, but thou art the same, and thy years shall have no end. The children of thy servants shall continue, and their seed shall be established before thee. And so again, not to belabor the point, but this is, I believe, a picture here of the millennial kingdom. And even more so, the millennial kingdom is a picture, it's a type of the eternal kingdom. And so we're getting glimpses of both those things here in Psalm 102. But for us, here in the church age, we have the doctrinal application to look forward to, that we get to participate in all this, that we get to be present in that kingdom, that we get to be present with God in his glory. We get to be present with the Son in the millennial kingdom and with the entire Godhead in the eternal kingdom. But spiritually, on our day-to-day life, here still in the church age, whenever there can be affliction, whenever there can be overwhelming things enter into our life, we know that he is in control, that he is still the same. We know that he has the power to remove our affliction. And if he so chooses not to do that, he has the power to enable that affliction to refine us, to improve us, to make us better for him. Remember, we're not going to be tempted beyond anything that we can withstand. So, the Father is not going to look down upon me, and he's not going to look down upon you and say, okay, you get on the cross and take on the sin of the whole world. None of us could withstand that. Not one of us could withstand that. But the things he does give us, we'll be able to withstand. We have to just trust and rely on him. So, that is Psalm 102. We could have spent a lot longer if we would have discussed in detail some of these doctrinal things, but we've discussed them at length. If anybody has any questions about that, I'm happy to answer them. If anybody has enough questions, we may go back and do a deep dive on Psalm 102 specifically. But I think that the point again, Psalm 102 is one of those Psalms where it's like, how can you not believe in the millennial kingdom? It just jumps off the page. So, any comments or questions this morning?